Book 3 of The Wanderings of Oisin by William Butler Yeats. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Wanderings of Oisin by William Butler Yeats. Book 3. Fled foam underneath us and round us a wandering and milky smoke. High as the saddle girth, covering away from our glances the tide, and those that fled and that followed from the foam pale distance broke. The immortal desire of immortals we saw in their faces and sighed. I mused on the chase with the Fenians and Bran, Sgeolan, Lomere, and never a song sang Niamh, and over my finger tips came now the sliding of tears and sweeping of mist cold hair, and now the warmth of sighs, and after the quiver of lips. Were we days long or hours long in riding, when, rolled in a grisly peace, an isle lay level before us with dripping hazel and oak, and we stood on a sea's edge we saw not, for whiter than new-washed fleece fled foam underneath us, and round us a wandering and milky smoke. And we rode on the plains of the sea's edge barren and grey sand on the green of the grasses, and over the dripping trees, dripping and doubling landward as though they would hasten away, like an army of old men longing for rest from the moan of the seas. That the trees grew taller and closer, immense in their wrinkling bark, dropping a murmurous dropping old silence, and that one sound. For no live creatures lived there, no weasels moved in the dark. Long sighs arose in our spirits, beneath us bubbled the ground, and the ears of the horse went sinking away in the hollow night. For as drift from a sailor, slow drowning the gleams of the world, and the sun ceased on our hands, at our faces, on hazel and oak leaf, the light, and the stars were blotted above us, and the whole of the world was one. Till the horse gave a whinny, for cumbrous with stems of the hazel and oak, a valley flowed down from his hoofs, and there in the low grass lay, under the starlight and shadow, a monstrous slumbering folk, their naked and gleaming bodies poured out and heaped in the way. And by them were arrow and war-axe, arrow and shield and blade, and dew-blanched horns, in whose hollow a child of 3 years old could sleep on a couch of rushes, and all inwrought and inlaid, and more comely than man can make them, with bronze and silver and gold. And each of the huge white creatures was huger than 80 men. The tops of their ears were feathered, their hands were the claws of birds, and shaking the plumes of the grasses and the leaves of the mural glen, breathing came from those bodies, long warless, grown whiter than curds. The wood was so spacious above them, that he who has stars for his flocks fondle the leaves with his fingers, nor go from his dew-cumbered skies. So long were they sleeping, the owls had builded their nests in their locks, filling the fibrous dimness with long generations of eyes. And over the limbs and the valley the slow owls wandered and came, now in a place of star-fire, and now in a shadow place wide. And the chief of the huge white creatures, his knees in the soft star flame, lay loose in a place of shadow. We drew the reins by his side. Golden the nails of his bird claws flung loosely along the dim ground. In one was a branch soft shining with bells more many than sighs. In midst of an old man's bosom, owls ruffling and pacing around, sidled their bodies against him, filling the shade with their eyes. And my gaze was thronged with the sleepers, no, not since the world began. in realms where the handsome were many, nor in glamours by demons flung. Have faces alive with such beauty been known to the salt eye of man, yet weary with passions that faded when the sevenfold sees the young? And I gazed on the bell branch, sleep's forebear, far sung by the Sennachies. I saw how those slumberers, grown weary, there camping in grasses deep, of wars with the wide world and pacing the shores of the wandering seas, laid hands on the bell branch and swayed it and fed of unhuman sleep. Snatching the horn of Niam, I blew a long lingering note. Came sound from those monstrous sleepers, a sound like the stirring of flies. He shaking the fold of his lips and heaving the pillar of his throat, watched me with mournful wonder out of the wells of his eyes. I cried, "Come out of the shadow, King of the nails of gold, and tell of your goodly household and the goodly works of your hands, that we may muse in the starlight and talk of the battles of old." Your questioner, Oisin, is worthy. He comes from the Fenian lands. Half open his eyes were and held me, dull with the smoke of their dreams. His lips moved slowly in answer, no answer out of them came. And he swayed in his fingers the bell branch, slow dropping a sound in faint streams, softer than snowflakes in April and piercing the marrow like flame. Wrapped in the wave of that music, with weariness more than of earth, the moil of my centuries filled me, and gone like a sea-covered stone, with the memories of the whole of my sorrow and the memories of the whole of my mirth. And a softness came from the starlight and filled me full to the bone. In the roots of the grasses, the sorrows, I laid my body as low, and the pearl-pale Niam lay by me, her brow on the midst of my breast. And the horse was gone in the distance, and years after years gan flow. Square leaves of the ivy moved over us, binding us down to our rest. Man of many white croziers, a century there I forgot how the fetlocks drip blood in the battle when the fallen on fallen lie rolled, how the falconer follows the falcon in the weeds of the heron's plot, and the name of the demon whose hammer made concubines sold blade of old. And man of the many white croziers, a century there I forgot. The spear shaft is made out of ashwood, the shield out of osier and hide. How the hammers spring on the anvil, on the spearhead's burning spot. How the slow blue-eyed oxen of Finn low sadly at evening tide. But in dreams, mild man of the croziers, driving the dust with their throngs, moved round me of seamen or landsmen, all who were winter tales. Came by me the kings of the red branch with roaring of laughter and songs, or moved as they moved once, love-making or piercing the tempest with sails. Came Blaenade, MacNassa, tall Fergus, who feastward of old time slunk, Cook Barrack the traitor, and Warward the spittle on his beard never dry, dark Baylor, as old as a forest, Carborne, his mighty head sunk, helpless men lifting the lids of his weary and death-making eye. And by me in soft raiment the Fenians moved in loud streams, and Grania, walking and smiling, sewed with her needle of bone. So lived I and lived not, so wrought I and wrought not with creatures of dreams, in a long iron sleep, as a fish in the water goes dumb as a stone. At times our slumber was lightened when the sun was on silver or gold, when brushed with the wings of the owls in the dimness they love going by. When a glowworm was green on the grass leaf, lured from his lair in the mould, half wakening we lifted our eyelids and gazed on the grass with a sigh. So watched I when, man of the croziers, at the heel of a century fell, weak in the midst of the meadow, from his miles in the midst of the air, a starling like them that foregathered neath a moon waking white as a shell, when the Fenians made foray at morning with Bran, Sgeolan, Lomere. I awoke. The strange horse without summons out of the distance ran. Thrusting his nose to my shoulder, he knew in his bosom deep that once more moved in my bosom the ancient sadness of man, and that I would leave the immortals their dimness, their dews dropping sleep. Oh, had you seen beautiful Niamh grow white as the waters are white, Lord of the croziers, you even had lifted your hands and wept. But the bird in my fingers I mounted, remembering alone that delight of twilight and slumber were gone, and that hooves impatiently stepped. I cried, O Niamh, O white one, if only a 12-houred day I must gaze on the beard of Finn, and move where the old men and young in the Fenians' dwellings of wattle lean on the chessboards and play. Ah, sweet to me now were even bald Conan's slanderous tongue. Like me were some galley forsaken far off in Meridian Isle, remembering its long-oared companion, sails turning to threadbare rags, no more to crawl on the seas with long oars mile after mile, but to be amid shooting of flies and flowering of rushes and flags. Their motionless eyeballs of spirits grown mild with mysterious thought watched her those seamless faces from the valley's glimmering girth, as she murmured, O wondering Usheen, the strength of the bell branch is naught, for there moves alive in your fingers the fluttering sadness of earth. Then go through the lands in the shadow and see what the mortals do, and softly come to your Niamh over the tops of the tide. But weep for your Niamh, O Usheen, weep, for if only your shoe brushed lightly as haymouse earth's pebbles, you will come no more to my side. O flaming line of the world, O when will you turn to your rest? I saw from a distant saddle, from the earth she made her moan. I would die like a small withered leaf in the autumn, for breast unto breast we shall mingle no more, nor our gazes empty their sweetness lone. In the isles of the farthest seas, where only the spirits come, where the wind's less soft than the breath of a pigeon who sleeps on her nest, nor lost in the star-fires and odours the sound of the sea's vague drum. O flaming line of the world, O when will you turn to your rest? The wailing grew distant. I rode by the woods of the wrinkling bark, where ever is murmurous dropping old silence, and that one sound. For no live creatures live there, no weasels move in the dark, in a reverie forgetful of all things, over the bubbling ground. And I rode by the plains of the sea's edge, where all is barren and grey, grey sand on the green of the grasses, and over the dripping trees, dripping and doubling landward as though they would hasten away, like an army of old men longing for rest from the moan of the seas. And the winds made the sands on the sea's edge turning and turning go, as my mind made the names of the Fenians far from the hazel and oak. I rode away on the surges, where high as the saddle bow fled foam underneath me, and round me a wandering and milky smoke. Long fled the foam flakes around me, the winds fled out of the vast, snatching the bird in secret, nor knew I embosomed apart, and they froze the cloth on my body like armour riveted fast, for remembrance lifting her leanness keened in the gates of my heart, till fattening the winds of the morning an odour of new mown hay came, and my forehead fell low, and my tears like berries fell down. Later a sound came, half lost in the sound of a shore far away, from the great grass barnacle calling, and later the shore weeds brown. If I were as I once was, the strong hoofs crushing the sand and the shells, coming out of the sea as the dawn comes, a jaunt of love on my lips, not coughing, my head on my knees, and praying and wroth with the bells, I would leave no saint's head on his body from Lachlan to bearer of ships. Making way from the kindling surges, I rode on a bridle path, much wondering to see upon all hands of wattles and woodwork made, your bell-mounted churches, and guardless the sacred Carn and the Wrath, and a small and a feeble populace stooping with mattock and spade, or weeding or ploughing, with faces a-shining with much toil wet, while in this place and that place with bodies unglorious their chieftains stood, awaiting in patience the straw death, crozier one, caught in your net, and the laughter of scorn from my mouth like the roaring wind in a wood. And because I went by them so huge and so speedy, with eyes so bright, came after the hard gaze of youth, or an old man lifted his head, and I rode and I rode and I cried out, the Fenians hunt wolves in the night. So sleep thee by daytime, a voice cried, the Fenians a long time are dead. A white beard stood hushed on the pathway, the flesh of his face as dried grass, and in folds round his eyes and his mouth he sad as a child without milk. And the dreams of the islands were gone, and I knew how men sorrow and pass, and their hound and their horse and their love and their eyes that glimmer like silk. And wrapping my face in my hair I murmured, in old age they ceased, and my tears were larger than berries, and I murmured, where white clouds lie spread on Crevro or broad Knockfith, and with many of old they feast on the floors of the gods, he cried, no, the gods a long time are dead. And lonely and longing for Niamh, I shivered and turned me about, a heart me longing to leap like a grasshopper into her heart. I turned and rode to the westward and followed the sea's old shout, till I saw where Mauve lies sleeping till starlight and midnight part. And there at the foot of the mountain two carried a sack full of sand. They bore it with staggering and sweating, but fell with their burden at length. Leaning down from the gem-studded saddle, I flung it 5 yards with my hand, a sob for men waxing so weakly, a sob for the Fenians' old strength. The rest you have heard of, O croziered man, how, when divided the girth, I fell on the path, and the horse went away like a summer fly, and my years 300 fell on me, and I rose and walked on the earth, a creeping old man, full of sleep, the spittle on his beard never dry. How the men of the Sandsack showed me a church with its belfry in air, sorry place where for swing of the war axe in my dim eyes the crozier gleams. What place have Gialti and Conan and Bran, Skjolden, Lomer? Speak, you too are old with your memories, an old man surrounded with dreams.
Where the flesh of the foot-sole clingeth on the burning stones is their place, where the demons whip them with wires on the burning stones of wide hell, watching the blessed ones move far off, and the smile on God's face, between them a gateway of brass, and the howl of the angels who fell.
Put the staff in my hands, for I go to the Fenians, O cleric, to chaunt the war songs that roused them of old. They will rise, making clouds with their breath, innumerable singing, exultant. The clay underneath them shall pant, and demons be broken in pieces and trampled beneath them in death. And demons afraid in their darkness, deep horror of eyes and of wings, afraid their ears on the earth laid, shall listen and rise up and weep, hearing the shaking of shields and the quiver of stretched bowstrings, hearing hell loud with a murmur as shouting and mocking we sweep. We will tear out the flaming stones and batter the gateway of brass, and enter, and none saith no when there enters the strongly armed guest. Make clean as a broom cleans, and march on as oxen move over young grass. Then feast, making converse of wars and of old wounds, and turn to our rest.
On the flaming stones without refuge the limbs of the Fenians are tossed. None wore on the masters of hell who could break up the world in their rage, but kneel and wear out the flags and pray for your soul that is lost through the demon love of its youth and its godless and passionate age.
Ah me, to be shaken with coughing and broken with old age and pain, without laughter, a show unto children, alone with remembrance and fear, all emptied of purple hours as a beggar's cloak in the rain, as a haycock out on the flood, or a wolf sucked under a weir. It was sad to gaze on the blessed, and no man I loved of old there. I throw down the chain of small stones. When life in my body has ceased, I will go to Cialti and Conan and Bran, Sciolin, Lomere, and dwell in the house of the Fenians, be they in flames or at feast. End of Book 3. End of the Wanderings of Oisin by William Butler Yeats. Recorded by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com.